Welcome to Journey. The very best way that we can expand our own journey is to share our personal experiences with each other as we shift in our consciousness. And with us is Colleen Johnson, who has agreed to share her journey with us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here and a little nervous.
Oh, well, we're going to dive right in and get you talking. The thing that I think we're looking at the most these days is altered states of consciousness, other realities, extraterrestrials, other dimensional beings. And I believe that you've explored that and had some of that occur in your own life.
That's correct. In fact, all of those dimensions that you just mentioned are very central to who I am and continuing to study about it in every way, partly because of my own personal experiences as a UFO abductee and contactee.
Let's talk about that experience.
Okay. Where should I start? That in the beginning, when I began to re-experience some very unusual happenings that seemed to indicate that I had been a UFO abductee, and at first it came more often in the form of being the usual one on the examination table and terrified. I, for many, many years, did not want to believe that maybe I'd read too much science fiction. Maybe I was making it up as a screen for other kinds of traumatic experiences that happened to me as a child. And so the first phase was to begin to re-experience a lot of what happened and not wanting to believe it and continuing to put it away.
And don't we do that a lot? We compartmentalize any traumatic experiences, actually tuck them away, and then they start resurfacing. And that's where we have to tell the difference too between what's real memory and what, like you said, you thought you might be making it up.
Yes, and so again, especially because I was a psychotherapist, all of these various areas of what's real and not real really came into play for me. But I finally decided that if I was going to continue to be very much triggered by certain experiences, for instance, I'd be watching TV and it would be a UFO story, and all of a sudden something would trigger me on the screen in the midst of the story, and I'd find myself shifted inside and running upstairs, and I'd be a child screaming, screaming, "Don't come near me." And when that began to happen a lot, and I began to realize that it was very difficult for me to have control over that. I also wasn't seeing anything. I don't have visualizations, but it was like my whole body began to re-experience, and I was an observer, kind of stepped aside, still very much there, but watching this happen and then trying to discover how did I get control back in my body. I began to feel like, okay, I then need to allow this to happen. It was going to happen anyway. I better start learning about what was really going on here and not judge it and not put it in the category of fantasy or pretend. It was more than that.
Well, we use our imagination, I think. You said you didn't specifically have visualizations. You had more the experience of it again.
Yes.
At the same time, did you think you were just experiencing a fantasy world, or did it feel, did you know in the core, that's me?
When I would be re-experiencing it, there was no way that anybody, including my observer part, could tell me it was not real and it was not happening, because it was on such a deep, visceral level.
Right, a feeling level.
It was like
really
totally in terms of what my body was doing, how it felt physically, in terms of often being very cold, shaking, feeling them putting something on my head. I would also be aware of what was coming out of my mouth, because realize again, it was like I was stepped aside and channeling. And part of me was certainly back there, although there was another part very much here and now. So I'd be listening to what was coming out of my mouth as well, and hearing me say things like, I don't want to see any more pictures, I'm tired, can we stop?
Who do you think you were communicating with at that point?
I finally began to realize that it certainly didn't look like you and me, and I really had to accept that finally, that I still wasn't able to see who they were, but some part of me, or the memory was there, that no, these were not humans. So the first layer then was really going through the emotional aspects of it, of the terror, the pain, the confusion, and working that through, and then getting more and more control back, finally saying, okay, I've had the information, all I can get from this. Now where do I go with this? How can I begin to get information about these experiences in some other ways?
And so what was the best way you found to do that?
Oh, and I was drawn to, of course, reading a great deal about it when Whitley Schreiber's book came out, Communion. That's how I knew for me what they looked like in terms of mine, because I looked at the cover of that book, as so many people did. It was just instant.
It has triggered a lot of people.
That was, okay, now I had a form here almost to work with. And then I began to ask many, many questions, not only in terms of how did I get my own power back, because I didn't like the idea of these experiences in terms of being re-triggered could take over me at any time.
Right.
That was not okay
with me. Make you feel powerless and helpless, huh?
I was the child again.
Right.
And in a new way. And so it was beginning then not only to talk, if you will, with that child in me who had gone through those experiences and forming a stronger core in myself and insisting that I could and needed to take control back, even if I didn't, well, especially because I didn't have it then as a child. So that was a very large step. Another important step was I began to change my framework of understanding around it. I began to say to myself, okay, let's look at it in terms of it's something that happened, and maybe it's more about expanding who I am as a human being. And can I begin to see the positive and the riches that are in it, even though at the same time I was furious that they had, against my will as that child, had me on that examination table. Positive memories also, not memories, re-experiencings began to also come forth in terms of I had seen them as my teachers. I had loved them.
You have both going on. It's like the extreme polarity being presented to you.
Exactly.
The terror of I'm out of control and they're doing something to me that I can't have control over. At the same time, recognizing a teacher aspect. I hear a lot of stories similar to this. And people start off by saying, I was abducted and it's against my will, and now I'm having contact at a multidimensional level that expands their awareness. That sounds like what that's happened to you. Now how many, and it took years, didn't it?
It took years for me to grow into a larger framework of understanding and trying to make sense of those experiences, and also eventually why did they happen. But certainly for a while there were almost like two very distinct, very different camps. Like here were the ones who were bad and here were the ones who were good, who were my teachers and I loved, and they were more of a family to me in some ways than my human family. And I loved being able to commune directly, mind to mind, if you will, and to learn what they were teaching me. So it was very difficult to try to integrate these two opposite pictures, and I'm still not totally clear, are they the same beings or are they two different camps? Right now I'm thinking that maybe they're the same ones, because I know as a therapist that if you take negativity into any experience, you're going to perceive it differently than if you're coming from a very wide open, accepting, excited place.
Exactly. Your perceptions change.
Yes.
So you looking at them can change as to perhaps who they are.
Yes.
What's it told you though? Who are you?
Say that again.
Who are you now? I mean, as far as
who am I now?
Right. Are we looking at, like you said earlier, something of an expanded consciousness on your part?
Once I moved beyond the phase I just mentioned, and it's like one phase after another as I keep growing with it and I allow it to teach me, if you will. I began to recognize that I had my ET part within me. How could I not have? This was a very important experience that happened many times to me as a child. In certain respects, they were my families, and so I modeled after them. So I incorporated and took in within me an ET part. I had to also come to that acceptance. I did not want to. That was not very comfortable for me.
Right.
But then that part could become my teacher.
Sure.
And it was like, okay, I think maybe then I can handle this. So it began, okay, I have all these different parts in me. and now it includes this ET part. So, and then I began to realize, okay, the ET part is also learning about being a human being. I mean, that is part about what they were about. Is not just on the examination table, which was one way to learn what is the human being like, but what is it really like to be here and experiencing in a human body. So then I began to realize that's partly what's going on here. They have something to learn from us just as much as we have to learn from them. It was a two-way street.
Yeah, that's quite an awareness and acceptance. And you had to pull out of the terror and the fear. Fear is what our biggest motivator as well as our greatest obstacle.
Right.
But when you approach these experiences now and you can shed the fear, what does it feel like then? I
have to admit, first of all, there are times when the terror still comes up very, very strongly, as recently as a couple of nights ago, when again I was triggered. But now it's different. Most of the time it doesn't take control. I can go within and say, oh, okay, you want to give me any information in there about what that was about, that triggering? And is there a different way to look at this? Do we really need to continue to be afraid? Or can we switch it now to what can we learn from this that's going to expand me as a human being and that I can give to others? I haven't quite crossed that threshold yet. In moving into a centered place where I can go back into those experiences and see it really differently from an adult-centered perspective, the entire picture, an overview. I haven't gotten there yet, but my sense is I'm getting closer to being able to do that.
Yes.
And that will include joyfulness, hopefully.
And doesn't that feel empowering? To say, in this experience, I want to learn, I want to have conscious remembrance. Do you then have more conscious remembrance of an experience that might occur in an altered state or dream state? Or?
That's my sense, that that is partly what's going to start happening.
Do you ask for it?
I have different parts of me that I've worked with over the years, and right up to a couple of mornings ago, it was saying to them, okay, how about you guys determining what's the first little true memory you can give me? Because at some point, re-experiencing it is a kind of a clumsy way to get information. It's not the most efficient. So how about now, a little bit more directly here, even though I still don't have visualizing, surely you can give it to me in some other ways. So find the first one that would be easiest for me to handle and to assimilate. Because so often it would be a big chunk, would be vomited out literally, and then there would be some weeks of having to work with that and to integrate it.
Physically, emotionally, mentally, the whole bit.
All of it, absolutely all of it.
And I don't want people to think it's easy, because you know you're sounding like you're coming to a point of experience it in a more delightful, joyous way. But it certainly hasn't been an easy journey, has it?
It hasn't been easy, and there are still elements, for instance, acupuncture. I've tried the needles, and literally they, for most people, have no pain. For me, it's like it moves me directly into psychic pain and into the UFO space, because they did put needles in.
So that triggers it automatically.
If I went right now to an acupuncturist, that would still be there. And that angers a part of me. It's like, I want to be able to have the control. Control isn't the best word. I don't want my body to have fear at such a deep level. I want the healing to occur eventually.
Sounds like, too, you went through the process of talking to that child that originally had these experiences in a terrifying way, to heal the child, too. Which is a tremendous, experience for us all, regardless of what kind of experience we've had, is to really heal that inner child that's always wanting something.
Yes, I had to.
Wanting recognition, or not to be abandoned, not to be ignored.
For me, it was a very important aspect of working through this area and healing myself, along with realizing over a period of time that I couldn't really have total understanding if I didn't move into a larger framework. And so that eventually moved into a lot of the different areas that we read about in the books now that have to do with seeing it symbolically, a mythical journey, an archetypal journey. There are so many dimensions and levels in understanding it. And it's almost like, to the extent I understand that, I begin to understand myself in all of these different dimensions as well.
Do you believe, as a spirit form uppermost, that even though you're in a physical form here as this female, that you, in the spirit consciousness, are exploring and having other realities go on at the same time?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And
do you feel like sometimes you're slipping in to actually experiencing
I'm open
that?
to other realities in addition to the, if one could call it the UFO one. And yes, that is for my expansion and my learning. And at this point, I have a belief, and all my beliefs could change tomorrow because I'm changing too. But for now, my belief is that I chose to have the experiences with the UFO beings for my own growth.
Okay.
And that doesn't negate, and I want to really underline this, that as the child, I had no memory of that. And so when I got into what happened with me as an adult, with what happened with me as a child with the UFO beings, and I went into all the terror and the pain and the confusion, that had a right to be there too, and I've had to really work with the anger of they had no right to violate my body. So it was like, again, these two are side by side, now what do I do with them and how do I integrate them? And I'm still working with that one.
I think the balance that you can come to as you integrate that, and like you said, that's the expansion part, you know, being able to recognize both may be occurring, both exist in this world, and to integrate and allow that to merge, you know, expand your awareness. Do you think our planet is itself going through an expansion? We hear a lot about prophecies and earth changes and fourth dimension and, you know, coming up and a tremendous shift. How's that feel for you?
Even if it wasn't, with more and more people believing it, we're going to create that reality. So one way or another, yes.
Well, I think it's
happening.
It can be exciting, I think.
It is definitely happening. And certainly the encounters with the UFO beings, I believe, is a very large part of it, because it is about how do we begin really expanding out of how we have seen ourselves as human beings. And I think that expansion is taking place on many dimensions, including psychically, and that what that means is that we will be moving more and more into taking on perhaps psychic powers with much greater understanding than we have ever had. The ETs have that. That's their strong suit.
It is. The telepathy that we hear so much about, in one form, may be an exercise of mind control over us because we don't have that same ability. But to equally come up and be able to telepathically actually respond to them in a very powered way, you know. Equal. In a communicative way.
And even if I can't do that, it is still really important for me to eventually, if I ever have an encounter with them in this human form, I want it to be as equal to equal, and I want them to realize that I'm no longer a child, that they can just up there and do what they wish with me. They cause a lot of fragmentation in terms of my body continuing to carry the memories, even though somehow it seems like they had the power to switch me into a very calm, contented place, even as a student with them. But this really caused a fragmentation of these two very important aspects.
And some people that haven't been able to assimilate it and process it the way you have are in institutions, are dysfunctional in their life, unable to really be fully here. So going through, it's courageous to step up to that too. I mean, I really got to hand it to all the people that have these experiences. If the ability to allow it to fully re-experience itself and work it through
Yes.
It takes a great deal of courage.
Yes. And again, it's like hitting a wall and being bounced out of the memories. And of course, that comes up a great deal in other people's experiences here. And whether that's because of what they put in the way of suggestions, combined with our own fear of the unknown and not wanting to remember, so the two together could be an incredibly powerful wall to go against. But as we keep learning step by step, I think it's crucial for us to know that they are not superior to us. They have certain areas that they are superior, but perhaps they don't understand about individuality because they have more of the group mind. We're kind of moving back or into that direction, but maybe they're moving into learning, my God, how do I be an individual apart from sharing mentally and in every other aspect with my group? And what is this about the animal body? And what is this about feelings? Because I don't think they know much about that.
Well, if it is true that this race, that the little small grays that are so typical and talked about, are emotionless because of their genetic engineering and thousands of years of living underground, maybe because they destroyed their planet. You know, it makes sense. Big eyes, small bodies. Pretty soon they can't reproduce. There's no room. It sort of all makes a logical sense to our minds, I believe. We don't want that kind of future. We were well on our way to nuclear destruction ourselves. They're teaching us, you want to be like this, you know, and the emotions to them must be such an enigma because we are so full of emotion.
Yes, yes. And because of what we do, we look like a very violent, of course, greedy, unstable.
They can watch our TV and see that. Exactly.
And so I'm sure, because it's a package deal. If you're going to take on feelings, you have to take on sadness along with joy.
The pleasure and the pain.
Hate and love. It all goes together here, folks. And so I think they're really studying that. Like, what are the goodies if we do this? What are the goodies if we become individualized here and step away from the comfort of really being part of a group consciousness?
I have heard, and I hope it is true, some of the physical and non-physical beings, other dimensional beings that are observing us as a race go through this evolutionary transition, respect and honor us for wanting to do it fully intact with our emotions in a way to where we're not controlled by our emotions. We work with our emotions and we still can embrace the full extent of our emotions. And I think if that, you know, is gaining attention, you know, the Earth itself as a free will universe, you know, planet, that we're to be commended for that.
I think
it's not an easy road, is it?
No, I think right now in history, it's a very, very difficult place to be for most people because changes are happening so rapidly, and who we thought we were as human beings is going through incredible shifts here, and that's very frightening. That's the unknown. And that's what I have to keep working with inside of myself as I keep opening up to the next piece of information about my experiences. First thing always will be some little parts of me saying, no, 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 that's too scary. I don't want to know that. We aren't ready for that. And then a wiser part goes, yes, I think we're ready for this next piece. Let the cameras roll. Let's see what it is here. But it is that way. It's going to be that way for humans. And I think the more some of us can get more and more to the other side and model that and say, hey, you know, some of us are making it here. You can too.
Well, I want to jump right in and share some of the other people too, like yourself, that are sharing with us. And as we come up to getting close to closing, you've read a lot of these books, so have I. Discernment. Number one, isn't it? Don't believe everything you read, but some wonderful, wonderful material for each of us to explore on our own journey. And I'm just going to put them up here, so if you recognize them in a bookstore, you'll see that there's just some material out here that embraces a galactic neighborhood that we possibly are living in.
Yes.
And you are experiencing that, your ability to share with us. And here's a great one I love. Nothing in this book is true, but it's exactly the way it is. Okay. So I want to thank you for sharing what you have learned on your experience, on your journey, because it's it's this that helps others. And together, I think we're going to be expanding our planetary journey into maybe a galactic journey.
And I think it is about doing it together. And I just want to say one quick thing, regardless of how scary somebody coming into these experiences in a new way may be by them, there are ways to turn it around so that you can handle the experiences and get the riches from them, because there will be riches from them. And then I am the one that gains regardless of what happened.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. And I want you to take what you've gotten from this and get the riches out of every moment of your journey.